late 1830s by decades. It could be argued that this is the frontispiece from Organic Remains of a Former World. And Richard Corbell did this frontispiece in 1804. And it's one of the first scenes of an ancient landscape that draws on the newly developing sciences of geology and paleontology, as well as the Bible. We've got here the end of the Great Flood of 2348 BC. In the background, we can see the Ark stranded on what will later be the summit of Mount Ararat, and the rainbow, the first rainbow in the background. But they chose to explain the very great number of seashells that we find in sedimentary deposits, some of them very far inland, as the remains of aquatic organisms left behind by the receding floodwaters. So in this picture, Corbell includes the shells of marine organisms on the strand line there, including a couple that are unmistakably ammonites. As far as I know, this is the first attempt to show an ammonite or any prehistoric animal in something resembling its natural habitat. So it could be argued that the first examples of paleo art are ammonites. Later on, other artists continued this tradition, focusing more on the organisms themselves rather than on their theological implications. One of the earliest efforts on these lines is Duria Antiquior, which means a more ancient Dorset in Latin, done by Henry de la Beche, based on fossils found in the clays and muddy limestones of the Lias Formation of southern England, many of those fossils collected by Mary Anning. And this really kind of exemplifies Tennyson's view of nature red in tooth and claw. Every animal in the picture seems to be either eating something or getting eaten by something else, and they all look strangely cheerful about it, just in order to make sure that every link of the food chain is represented. De la Beche drew some coprolites raining down from the nether ends of some of the larger reptiles. In later versions of this illustration, those coprolites were often whited out. Here's the whole thing. And there's a couple of things I'd like to point out about it. One is the sailing ammonites that you see in the background. At the time, ammonites were known to be related, they were known to be cephalopods, but only two cephalopods were known which had external shells. One of them, the chambered nautilus, which was of deep water species about which little was known, especially its habits. And the other one was the paper nautilus, or argonaut. Almost every natural history collection had an argonaut shell. And many naturalists knew that it had two arms that had a loop at the end, and the loop was webbed to make a pair of sail-like appendages. And many of the day assumed that those were held aloft like sails to allow the argonaut to scud across the surface of a lagoon, even though nobody had actually seen this happen. So at the time, it was figured that that was a reasonable lifestyle to assume for ammonites as well. One more thing to point out about this picture, and this is a convention that's so commonplace today that we scarcely notice it, but it was very unusual for 1830, and that is the way that the scene is divided by a horizontal line into the underwater portion below, showing the creatures as they might be seen by a viewer under the water, and then the above air portion in the top half. This method of showing aquatic scenes did not become common until the aquarium craze hit Europe about 20 years later. Back in the time of La Beche, it was much more common to show underwater creatures like this. This is Jura Formation from 1831, drawn by Nicholas Christian Hohe for Petrifacta Germanii by August Goldfuss. So in this picture, we've got parts of the animals poking up above the surface, and then creatures that are completely underwater are depicted as if we're looking through the surface of the water, which is startlingly clear, and seeing them down there under the surface. Incidentally, this must have been a really difficult effect to pull off in the medium of lithograph, and my hat's off to the artists. The other way that they would show marine creatures back then was like this. This is another picture by Christian Hohe for Fossils of Germany, also by August Goldfuss, published in 1844. So here we've got a Carboniferous forest, and then the marine animals shown as shells washed up on the shoreline as they might be encountered by a person just walking along in the sand. We don't know where de la Beche exactly got the idea for doing that split screen approach, but it might have been from diagrams of underwater salvage operations. Now here's another de la Beche picture, this time a woodcut from the second edition of the Geological Manual, published in 1832. It's accompanied by this caption, which reads, "It is attempted in the annexed woodcut to convey an idea of the probable form of Ichthyosaurus communis and of the head of Ichthyosaurus tenuirostris. The former is represented on dry land, where it probably never reposed for the purpose of exhibiting its form." So he doesn't think for a minute they actually did that. He's just making it easier to see what the animal looks like. And then here's another picture from the Geological Manual, also by de la Beche. And he writes, "It is figured as swimming high above the water for the purpose of showing its general form. It more probably swam beneath the surface in the manner of crocodiles, which would enable it the better to support the very great length of its neck." So these comments make it clear that de la Beche was not attempting to depict the actual habitus of these marine reptiles in life, but was utilizing conventions to better illustrate their anatomy. On the gripping hand, these two tropes took on a life of their own, adopted by other artists who apparently didn't know or didn't care that they were merely artistic conventions. The image of the plesiosaur holding its neck arched clear of the water is extremely familiar, making an appearance in Rudolf Zallinger's 1947 marine reptile mural at Yale, the cartoon Fantasia by Walt Disney, and of course exemplified by the infamous Sturgeon's photo, its modern avatar, the Loch Ness Monster. When eyewitnesses tell us that the monster holds its neck up out of the water, they should be aware that what they're reporting is not a scientifically accurate description of a plesiosaur, and not even an outdated description of a plesiosaur, but rather a description based on a reconstruction of a plesiosaur that, by the artist's own admission, was never intended to be accurate in the first place. The marine reptiles on the land shows up in many publications as well. This is the Little Golden Book of Dinosaurs. Some of you might remember this from your childhood. I know I do. Also, many pictures by Zdeněk Burian show sunbathing marine reptiles on the beach. And most recently, we saw the Cryptocleidos in Walking with Dinosaurs, basking on the shore as well. In passing, I'd also like to say that I love the Kentucky bluegrass that we see in this Jurassic scene. It's a nice touch. So now we're going to fast forward to the late 1990s, partly because I want to show how I've addressed some of these issues in my own artwork, and also because we were starting to enter the era where the images were no longer public domain. So here is a picture I did to show the marine life of the Ordovician period. And you'll notice that every creature in this picture has a hard shell. Now, or a calcareous skeleton like the corals. Now, this does not mean that every creature that lived in the ocean in Ordovician times had a hard shell. It just means that those are the ones that are preserved for us to find in the fossil record. There could have been many other creatures, some of them potentially quite important, that we never find. To get a handle on the magnitude of this problem, imagine like 100 million years ago, trying to reconstruct the marine ecosystem of the northern oceans without being aware of the existence of krill. I mean, krill are the linchpin of the North Polar food chain, and yet the euphacid crustaceans have a thin, protein-rich, highly biodegradable shell, and there's a real possibility that they might not survive as fossils at all 100 million years from now. So there could have been a lot of critters in the Ordovician that we don't know about simply because they didn't have hard calcareous shells. Even when we do have the hard parts of the animal preserved, we don't always know what the soft parts look like. And we do our best either by inferring the lifestyle of the animal in question. Like take Maclurites down there at the lower left-hand side of the screen. This is a gastropod that looks like somebody molded a snail shell out of plasticine and then pressed it hard down against a table so that it's flat on one side. And these have been interpreted as lying flat on the sea bottom and filter feeding. So to help it with its filter feeding, I gave it a paravella like you see in many larval planktonic mollusks to get bits of food out of the seawater. Other times we can look to modern relatives and use those as a guide to reconstruct the soft parts. For example, the snail Liospira seen at lower right. Endocerus is an orthicone, a straight-shelled nautiloid, and so here I've drawn from the modern chambered nautilus to reconstruct the shape of the head. It is possible, however, to take this approach too far. Anna Bitter, who was the marine biologist who in the 1960s did research that revealed just about everything that we know about the living chambered nautilus at that time, and is the foundation for much later nautilus research. At any rate, in her book, she wrote, "The danger is to think that the nautilus is a living fossil, when in fact it is a very highly evolved and very specialized animal. All these reconstructions that try to shove a nautilus head into an Orthoceras shell make me laugh." Oops, let's move on, shall we? All right. Now this also is an Ordovician scene. It was irresistible to me because of its juxtaposition of two seemingly contradictory, paradoxical concepts. Here we've got a cold sea choked with icebergs in what is now one of the hottest and driest parts of the world, the Sahara Desert. So I was referring to Sam Gon III's pictorial guide to the orders of trilobites while I was drawing this. It's a very useful resource for a trilobite artist. Ironically, he lives in Hawaii, which is one of the very few states that does not have any trilobites at all whatsoever, but it's still a very good book. And at one point in the book, I read his lament that most artists don't depict trilobites doing much of anything except for lying around on the sea bottom. At this point, my drawing was still in the pencil sketch stage. And I was horrified to see that all I'd done was draw the trilobites lying around on the sea bottom like a bunch of beer coasters. So I erased it and started over, trying to make them doing some things a little more interesting. The selenopeltids swimming through the water column above, Ampix raising its abdomen to filter feed from the seawater, the Calimenid there curled up into a ball for protection from an attacking Dalmanitid. Trilobites are related to horseshoe crabs, and they are, where'd my cursor get to? That's so weird. My cursor seems to have disappeared. Maybe if I just click it, it'll advance. Well, at any rate, we'll burn that bridge when we get to it. So yeah, trilobites are related to horseshoe crabs, and they're probably similar in their habits to modern crustaceans. So we can look to horseshoe crabs and crustaceans for clues to their behavior and lifestyle. Other times, though, we're completely in the dark. Look at Dendrocystides in the middle of the picture. I have no idea how to reconstruct its habits. What can you say about the habits of a creature that looks like a cross between a sand dollar and an electric guitar? Oh, good, it did advance. Now, I write a question and answer column in the museum newsletter. People send me questions and I answer them. And if the answer is particularly interesting, then I turn it into a full-length article. sometimes my answers can be informed by the process of drawing the illustration for the article. In this case, for example, the question was, who were the ichthyosaurus's predators? So to illustrate the answer, I drew the most common species of ichthyosaurus, Ichthyosaurus communis, up in the upper left-hand corner there, and then drew other predators that would have lived in the lias with it to the same scale. And so seeing them all to the same scale like that shows that undoubtedly the most important predator to Ichthyosaurus was the 4.5 meter long Romaleosaurid Macroplata, which is shown at the upper right. For juvenile ichthyosaurs, also shown in the picture there, important predators would have been hybodont sharks and also the another Romaleosaurid called Myosaurus victor, which is at the center bottom there. The largest marine reptile of the lias was Temnodontosaurus, which was an ichthyosaur 9 meters long. Now, like other ichthyosaurs, Temnodontosaurus is interpreted as being a hunter of small game. But, and once again, it was the drawing that made this clear to me, when you're a 9 meter long marine reptile, a juvenile Ichthyosaurus communis is small game. This is the first drawing that I did. In fact, one of the first drawings I did after my exile to Wyoming back in 1998. This is one of my early attempts to illustrate the fauna of the seafloor of the Sundance Sea back near the end of the Jurassic period. As time went on, I came to realize that just about everything about this picture was wrong. I've got Trigonius here, and Trigonius is indeed found in the Sundance, but this is not the right species. So I've got the wrong species of Trigonius there. I've depicted them clinging to the substrate with threads of byssus, like modern mussels. And I also drew some Pentacrinites, a kind of crinoid, in the picture too. Now we've got some beautifully complete crinoid specimens, including Pentacrinites, in the Tate collection. So I referred to these specimens for the illustration and pretty much drew them in the exact same position that the fossil Pentacrinites were on the slab, which means that I did a very good job of drawing dead Pentacrinites in this picture. Well, by 2002, I'd learned a lot more about the Sundance and decided it was time to do a new, upgraded, and improved drawing of the Sundance seafloor community. By this time, I'd seen an excellent program on BBC, Blue Planet, with Sir David Attenborough. And this program included footage of real live crinoids in our modern age, filmed through the windows of deep diving submersibles. And they hold their arms in an umbrella shape. So I decided that that was a more appropriate posture for these crinoids in the Sundance. I drew Trigonia again, but this time properly burrowing in the mud, as it should be, and also this time the correct species. And also included Camptonectes in this picture, which is good. You should always include Camptonectes in a Sundance sea bottom drawing because it's the most or second most common fossil found in the Sundance Formation. They say that a picture's worth 1,000 words, and this picture has saved me 1,000 words many times over, because people are always finding the individual star-shaped sections from the stems of crinoids in Wyoming, and they're always bringing them to the museum to show to me and ask me what they are. So showing them this picture makes that explanation a whole lot easier for me. Another question I got was, I thought Liopleurodon was the biggest marine predator that ever lived. Ever since Walking with Dinosaurs, many people are familiar with Liopleurodon, and many people who have learned everything they know about Liopleurodon from watching Walking with Dinosaurs are probably shocked to hear that the largest Liopleurodon skeleton on display is a 4.5 meter long skeleton that's on display at the Tübingen Museum in Germany. There in the middle, I've drawn the Tübingen specimen to the same scale as my own skeleton. In case you need to know, I'm 179 centimeters tall. One of the nice things about being the artist is that you get to use yourself for scale if you want to. There's larger but less complete Liopleurodon specimens out there. Something I call Peter Dodson's law is that the bigger the reptile is, the less likely you are to find the whole skeleton. You're probably familiar with this in dinosaur science, and it seems to hold true for marine reptiles as well. So L.B. Tarlow described a skull of Liopleurodon that was 154 centimeters long. So if we scale up the Tübingen skeleton to match, we get a Liopleurodon that's about 6.5 meters long overall. Now, the top of the food chain in the Jurassic oceans of Europe was undoubtedly the stratosaur, Pliosaurus macromeris. This is known only from a partial mandible, 287 centimeters long. This indicates, though, that the animal's head would have been a full 3 meters long, and the whole animal would have been 12 meters from the snout to the tip of the tail. So that is a very impressive animal. Here at the Tate Museum, we've got a cast of a flipper of a pliosaur that was discovered at the beginning of the 20th century in Fremont County by Knight. And that specimen has been nicknamed Riptide. Nobody's yet found a complete skull or skeleton of this species, which has been named Megaleucosaurus rex. But we do have a couple of flippers and some other odds and sods, which indicate that if you scale up a Liopleurodon to match the size of our flipper, then we've got something 11 meters long with 2.5 meter long jaws. Incidentally, using a Liopleurodon skeleton to reconstruct Pliosaurus macromeris isn't as arbitrary as it might sound, because they're really, really similar. In fact, so much so that the stratosaur was originally misidentified as a species of Liopleurodon. Well, anyways, these are all impressive reptiles and reason enough for a time traveler to think twice before taking a swim in the Jurassic oceans. But the biggest predator in the ocean that's ever lived is still with us today, and that's the sperm whale, which reaches a length of 20 meters, and a third of that is head. Very fortunately for us, the sperm whale primarily feeds on cephalopods and bottom-dwelling fishes, and only very occasionally obsessive sea captains. By the way, after I finished this drawing, I decided that photocopiers that reduce and enlarge are the most useful invention since the eraser that goes at the end of the pencil. So here's a reconstruction of the marine reptiles of the Sundance community. In the back, we've got Megaleucosaurus rex overshadowing smaller marine reptiles, including Baptanodon, which is the Sundance ichthyosaur, and Tate, which is a small cryptoclydid that was named after the museum where I work. And of course, swarms and shoals of the ubiquitous belemnites. This place was Squid City back in the Jurassic period. There's places where you can find just thousands of their guards weathering out of hillsides and riverbanks. The bleached skin around the jaws of the Megaleucosaurus rex there is an idea that I got from looking at photos of sperm whales. Now here's a reconstruction of the Maori shale marine community. So in the Maori, which dates from the early Cretaceous period, it's about 100 million years old, there are lots and lots of fossils, and the overwhelming majority of them are individual fish scales. So there's many different sizes and shapes. Most of them are about the diameter of an adult human fingernail, and they're oval, round, or rectangular. Sometimes you find one about the size of a potato chip, and those probably belong to ichthyodectids. There's an ichthyodectid in the upper left. These are kind of tarpon-like fish that can have teeth up to the size of a human index finger, and the whole thing can get as long as a station wagon. The most distinctive and easy to identify scales are the scales of encodontids. They're rounded at the front, and then they have a serrated trailing edge, like they've been trimmed with a pair of pinking shears. Or if you put it rounded edge up, then they look like the ghosts from the video game Pac-Man. At any rate, those belong to encodontids, and there's an example of one of those in the lower right. That's the little fish with the very big teeth. Recently, Melissa Connolly has done a lot of work with trace fossils in the Maori. She's identified radiating arm marks that seem to have been made by cephalopods, probably squid, that were feeling the sea bottom mud, looking for a good place to lay their eggs. And sometimes you'll find whole strings of those little imprints in a row. Other trace fossils include grooves or furrows in the mud, some of them straight and some of them wavy, that might have been made by large fish or marine reptiles. I've included here some guesses as to what sorts of reptiles made which of those trace fossils, but as is always the case with trace fossils, these can be regarded at best as guesses. Now, here's an ammonite, Geletskytes. I used to draw ammonites with a head that looks more or less like the head of an ammonite, like the head of a nautiloid, sorry. But later discovered that ammonites are most likely more closely related to squids and octopus than they are to nautiloids. And so I've accordingly given them a more colioid-looking head with 8 to 10 arms. Not nautilus-like at all. Ammonite shells are sometimes found with bite marks that resemble, they're the right size and shape to have been made by an ammonite's beak. Some of them healed, which shows that an attack was made on a living victim. So it looks like ammonites were not above cannibalism. So that attack that you see at the bottom there, I've drawn a cross-section of that right up there at top. So you can see the internal anatomy. An ammonite's shell has a chambered portion called the phragmacone. So you can see the phragmacone there. And running around the outer edge of the shell is the siphuncle. And this is very important because in the siphuncle, that's a tube that connects all of the chambers or camerae to each other. And it's filled with soft tissue. And the ammonite was able to increase the salinity in the soft tissue of the siphuncle and suck the fluid out of those chambers and leave behind low pressure gas. And that would have made a very effective flotation device, allowing the ammonites to float underwater like a little submarine. So the one at bottom is the ammonite that got bitten in the last picture. And this is a female. Ammonites usually come in two forms, a large macroconch and a smaller microconch. And in the case of Geletskytes, the macroconch often has a swelling in the living chamber. And this has been interpreted by some as possibly being a brood chamber for protecting the young until they were ready to swim away and seek their fortunes on their own. Now here is Didymoceras. Most ammonites have the shell coiled up into a planar spiral, but towards the end of the Cretaceous period, there were a lot of ammonites that had weird shaped shells. These are the heteromorphs, and they include ones that are shaped like bobby pins or watch springs or fish hooks, or in the case of Didymoceras, kind of like a saxophone. Now, something like this could not have been a very fast swimmer. I can't imagine it had any more maneuverability than a shopping cart. And if it squirted water out of its hyponome, it probably just twitched around in circles. So I picture these guys hanging motionless in the water column, more or less like a Portuguese man-o-war. And the arms might have looked more or less like a handful of top ramen noodles dangling down and just waiting for some unsuspecting fish to blunder into them. As a side note, there's a folk rock duo that make music by blowing through the shells of ammonites. You might have even heard of them. Garmin and Siphonkle. Yeah, Garmin and Siphonkle. I'm kind of thankful now that I can't hear the groans at this precise moment. Well, the last picture is of a Hyposaurus, which is a member of the Dirasauridae. These are marine crocodiles that were abundant in the late Cretaceous period, and along with colonioid sea turtles, they are the only marine reptiles to survive the KT extinction and make a showing in the early Tertiary. They are characterized by very long neural spines over the neck, giving them sort of a bulldog neck appearance, and are thought to have been lightly armored. So to reconstruct the skin of this guy, I referred to the gavial, which is the most lightly armored of the modern crocodilians. Well, after the extinction event, the gyrosaurids found themselves in a strangely empty ocean that they had all to themselves for a change. No more ammonites, no more belemnites, no more mosasaurs or plesiosaurs. However, they lived long enough to see the oceans start to get restocked with a explosive radiation of teleost fishes and lamnid sharks, as well as the earliest ancestors of seals, sea lions, and whales and dolphins, making their first tentative forays into the marine environment. Eventually, of course, they took on and built a dynasty of their own. But in the words of Rudyard Kipling, that's another story. And my thanks to all the people on this slide, and especially to you people for inviting me to speak with you. So now I'm supposed to return the screen. Let's see. Oh, stop share. Should I click on that?
Yeah, you can do that.
Right.
So I just turned our mic back on. So here's some applause.
Oh, yay. All right. Well, good to know. And I've now clicked on stop share.
And yes, there was some groans and some laughs.
Okay. If there were any laughs, I'll take it.
So, yeah, good call there. So I presume you're open to questions?
Oh, absolutely.
So somebody online might be willing to just jump on. I've got 15 people in attendance here in person, and it looks like 17 in attendance online. So you have 32 or so guests.
Oh, good. My boss is going to want to know the numbers. All right, 30. 30 it is. I can remember that.
Over here. I got to bring you guys to the mic. Anybody online?
Can I click on chat to see if there's any? Oh, hello. Okay, I don't see any questions on chat.
Yep, those were earlier. So I'm curious about your background in the artwork. When did you start doing art, and were you formally trained in your artwork?
Good questions. I started drawing prehistoric life at the age of 4, but those first pictures weren't very good. But I continued to draw mostly dinosaurs, but then branching out to do anything prehistoric that I could learn about, all the way up through high school and into college. And then I set myself the goal of becoming a scientist, and took a lot of science classes. And then I took calculus and failed it. And then I took calculus again and failed it again. After the third time that I failed calculus, I decided that I might not be cut out to be a scientist, and I changed my major to fine art. But while I was still trying to pursue science, I took a lot of really interesting classes. I took human anatomy and physiology, insect biology, animal behavior, comparative chordate anatomy. That's the most interesting class I ever took. If you get a chance to take that yourself, by all means, jump on it. It's fascinating. So I don't regard that as a waste of time, because now I do a lot of illustrations for scientists. And if the scientist says to me something like, now, remember that the fossa antorbitalis is displaced anteriorly, I don't have to ask for a translation. The art classes that I took were pretty much about figure drawing and still life and technique and materials and stuff like that. When it comes to the knowing anatomy and paleontology for art, I'm pretty well self-taught.
That's excellent artwork. I really enjoy seeing it.
Oh, good.
Yeah, I got a question
A lot of
for you.
people
Real-
nodding.
I got a question for you. You said that some of the ammonites or cephalopods had 8 to 10 arms on them. Do you have any reason to believe that that's how many they had, or is there any that show that there's up to 10?
Yeah, this is one of the most confounding and frustrating mysteries in all of paleontology. Millions and millions of ammonite fossils are known, and none of them yet have been found with any indication of the arms. Now, with belemnites, we're a little bit more lucky because belemnites, instead of soft suction cups like an octopus, they had a double row of little chitin hooks. Now, usually, of course, those rot and get scattered, but occasionally, like in the Oxford clay of England, for example, belemnite guards have been found with little double rows of those chitin hooks extending away from them. And those allow us to see what the length and the number of the arms of a belemnite were. But for ammonites, we don't have a clue. We know what the range of number of arms is in modern squids and octopus, and we hope that we're in the ballpark with ammonites, but it's still anybody's guess.
All
If you
right,
want
thank
to
you.
put more arms on there, knock yourself out.
I draw stick ammonites.
I think my microphone's dying. I see it blinking. So I'll switch the regular computer and hopefully that'll work for the rest of the online meeting part of it. Any other questions? Thank you, Kent, for asking yours.
I had a quick comment. I have been Harold Hines here online. I've been reading a book about mammalian reconstruction and artistic renderings. And the point of the essay was that the fossils that have been found often are so fragmented and broken and so on. It's very
Oh, wow. Leave me hanging.
an ancient animal really bone structure and so on might have really looked like.
Yeah, and so there's 2 different factors that influence the accuracy of a reconstruction of an ancient mammal, and I do those too, although obviously they didn't enter into this presentation. One, of course, is the completeness of the material. If you've got a complete skeleton, you're on much firmer ground than if you are reconstructing an animal that's known only from teeth. However, as you know, undoubtedly, an enormous number of fossil mammals are known only from their teeth. And yet, paleontologists will still often ask you to draw the living animal in a picture. You look for the closest relative of that critter that you can find, either in life or known from a complete skeleton in the fossil record, and hope for the best. But yeah, some spectacular blunders have been made on that score. The other factor that influences accuracy of paleomammal reconstructions is how close of a modern relative they have. If I've got, say, the skeleton of an ancient horse, I can look at a modern horse and make some pretty confident guesses about how the soft tissue anatomy would have related to the skeleton of that ancient horse. But there's a lot of mammals that have no close living relatives and left no descendants, like Oreodonts and Entelodonts and Uintatherium and Andrewsarchus, and you can see reconstructions by 2 different artists based on the exact same skeleton and wonder if these 2 guys are even talking about the same animal, because there's a lot of leeway when we don't know anything about their relationships.
That kind of reminds me of the Desmostylus back and forth between the Americans and the Japanese.
Right, and Ray Troll, in his Cruising the Fossil Coastline, did a great 2-page spread showing sketches based on every reconstruction of Desmostylus that had been done up until that time, ranging from things that look a whole lot like a mastodon to things that look like an elephant's heel, and just about every combination of features in between that you can imagine. And yeah, that's an entire order of marine marine mammals, sorry, that's gone extinct. And so we don't have an analog to look for. And yeah, it's still pretty much wide open.